各位，我哋時間到啦，咁亦有足夠嘅法定人數。咁今日我哋保安事務。
Let's start the meeting of the panel on security. We now proceed to item 1 on the agenda, confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. Paper number 120, minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of October. On the 12th of December, the Secretariat has already invited comments from members on the minutes. They've received no comment on the minutes. Any comments now? If not, minutes confirmed. Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda, information papers issued since the last meeting. There are 3 information papers which were distributed to you before the meeting. Any comments on the information papers? No? Then we proceed to item 3 on the agenda, date of the next meeting and items for discussion. The next meeting will be held on the 3rd of December. The administration has proposed 2 items for discussion. The first is results of study of matters raised in the annual report 2012 to the Chief Executive by the Commissioner on Interception of Communications and Surveillance. The second one is the latest progress on the electronic exit entry permit for traveling to and from Hong Kong and Macau. There are items queuing up as set out in the list of outstanding items for discussion. In the past 2 weeks, together with the Deputy Chairman and the Secretary for Security and Undersecretary for Security, as well as other government officials, we had a discussion of these outstanding items. Issues submitted by members should be discussed as soon as possible, and we ask them to make arrangements as soon as possible. So that's what I would like to report to you. As for the proposed items for discussion for the December meeting, any comments? If not, those 2 items are confirmed. Before we proceed to discussing the drug testing scheme, on the 15th of November, Monday, at 9:45 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., we'll assemble here and then come back. We'll visit the Stanley Prison to understand and inspect the operation of the prison. Up to this moment, a total of 10 members and 4 non-members have signed up for the activity. I urge you to participate as far as possible. We'll try to understand the operation of the prison. With the consent of the panel, they'll go to the Finance Committee to discuss the upgrading of their system. They would submit a funding application. So we'll visit the prison to see whether there's such a need. Ms. Emily Lau, Mr. Chairman, perhaps we can remind the department that when we visit the prison, we particularly want to visit those prisoners who are imprisoned separately. Both ward officers of members and the Secretariat have received such cases, so we would like to look into those cases. Mr. Dennis Kwok, I'm queuing up to ask questions. On this activity, we've already had some discussions with the department. The media will be able to accompany us, but they are not going to follow us everywhere. There will be a place for an introduction to the media so that they will also understand the prison. As far as the Correctional Services Department is concerned, prisons are special places, so reporters won't be able to freely tour around. But I've specially requested that members of the media be allowed to visit places that can be open to them. All right, so if there are no further comments on this activity, we'll proceed to the next item on the agenda. Secretariat colleagues, please invite the attendants to come in. This discussion is about the public consultation document on drug testing scheme, rescue. In the process of a consultation exercise. In attendance today, we have, or maybe I'll let them be seated first before I introduce them to members. In attendance today, we have officials and members of the Action Committee Against Narcotics, with Mrs. Erica Hui, Commissioner for Narcotics, Principal Assistant Secretary for Security, Ms. Mandy Wong. And then from the ACAN, we have the Chairman, Professor Daniel Sheck, the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Treatment and Rehabilitation, Dr. Ben Cheung, as well as the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Preventive Education and Publicity, Dr. Tik Chi Yuen. Welcome. I also understand that before the presentation, there will be a 10-minute video to allow members to have some direct feeling of the scheme, and then we'll have a presentation of the scheme. So over to you, government representatives. Yes, a video will be shown. I think you can dim the lights.
個個都 high 㗎啦，咁不如我又 high 啦，咁樣食完之後，咁啊覺得同一個世界，大家即係可以同你有偈傾多啲咁樣咯，就。好正㗎，食過啦。哇！佢唔係好得喎。即係你唔會有一個朋友走埋同你講，你唔好 high 嘢啦。蝦嘢好慘㗎，佢哋只會繼續叫你繼續啦，繼續啦。你唔蝦嘢，你唔會同到我哋一齊玩㗎。你唔蝦嘢，你冇朋友。
咁佢哋都會去介紹其他朋友一齊不如你都試下啦，喂，好好玩㗎。咁通常就係呢個好好玩呢一句咧，咁啊大家就會一齊去試咯。
佢門口會有好多一啲閉路電視啊，一啲防盜裝置，嘗試去即係延遲我哋入場嗰個時間啊。你快執嘢啦！喂啊！ 咁導致到我哋入到去現場嘅時候咧，我哋見到地下會有啲毒品啦，咁亦都見到一啲青少年咧，佢個樣係迷迷糊糊啦，睇個樣根本就我哋會相信佢之前可能係吸食過毒品啦。咁但係可惜嘅就係話喺佢哋個身上面，我哋未必能夠搜到毒品。根據現行嘅法例咧，我哋警方係冇一個權力帶呢啲吸毒者咧翻去差館做一個檢測嘅，咁導致到咧我哋喺執法上面咧有一定性嘅困難嘅。
好彩啲警察冇權驗我哋啫，嗨幾多佢都唔知啦。我哋又可以繼續去第二間玩啦。
即係我哋又唔會講話我哋出去索 K 咯咁樣，但係就只係去行街咯。但係我哋就身上面就一定有嘅，行下就入去廁所噶啦。係啊，好有共鳴啊！你入去，我又跟住入去咁樣。係啊，唔夠食啊！你邊嚟啊？
俾晒你。
喺呢個吸毒嘅世界裏面，即係大家都係好互相利用啊！即係你有嘅時候，咁我咪過嚟咯；即係到你冇嘅時候，我咪唔理你咯。即係我理得你，我理得你究竟係你幾需要毒品啊？話你冇錢，你唔好買啊！
大小姐，你知冇眼使唔使幫你 call 白車啊？
唔使啊，我哋開 party 啊！
而家個地可能識咗嘢喎。電台330第一，喺尖東廣場對出噴水池，截查一男一女屍體。而家到嚟，我女警3個出，都喺身上攞。我要去開炮，你攔住佢。
以 K 仔嚟計咧，我哋做過啲統計咧，其實差唔多你可能玩咗1-2年咧，有50%咧係都會有呢個精神病嘅病徵咯，包括呢個焦慮症啦、抑鬱症啦，同埋思覺失調咯。掂咗幾年咧，個腦已經開始有呢個老人痴呆嘅病變，玩得太耐呢個毒品咧，咁就導致呢個腦衰退咧，完全咧失去咗自己照顧能力。除咗做唔到嘢啦，又自己照顧唔到自己，所以咧30幾歲咧已經要去老人院度住咯。
正常一個成年嘅膀胱咧，應該有400至500毫升嘅容量啦，差唔多就等於一支我哋講500毫升嘅汽水咁樣。當佢個膀胱長期受到個毒品影響啦，個時間越耐啦，個毒品嗰個量越多啦，或者佢吸食嗰個毒品個次數越密嘅時候咧，就會令到佢膀胱一路縮細嘅。我哋發覺縮到好細嘅時候咧，我哋見過有啲情況咧，好似等於一個酒樓嘅一個茶杯半個咁大到嘅啫。當佢一急嘅時候咧，佢去唔切廁所咧，就會流咗出嚟。
同朋友出街，你張凳濕咗喎，你條褲濕咗，你條裙濕咗喎，你係咪瀨尿啊？即係咁樣嗰啲就好困擾嘅。
佢好多時佢哋會吸食過多咯，無論係 K 仔啊或者冰毒咧，都會導致一個叫做急性中毒嘅情況。咁喺呢個情況之下咧，個人咧就會變得即係神志會好唔清醒啦，跟住咧就會變得好極度嘅焦慮啊，極度嘅即係不安啊咁樣，同埋咧可能會好嚴重咧，就會有一啲即係幻聽幻覺出現啊，或者一啲妄想，即係例如話被迫害感啊咁樣嘅出現。
食咗毒品之後咧，其實自己個身體咧好似好追落去咁，好似追落去想食咁。開頭只係趁佢哋唔喺屋企嘅時候咧，就會偷偷地食啦。咁其實慢慢咧食得越密嘅時候咧，個警覺性又自己放鬆咗，即係可能趁佢哋沖涼嘅時間咧，又會去食喎。
傾向去一啲其他更加隱密嘅地方啦，包括可能係佢哋啲朋友屋企一齊成班，即係我哋要採取嘅行動會更加困難。
佢話我爸爸我玩就係間電腦，咁喺電腦度已經聯絡咗速遞送到門口㗎啦，已經真係好快啊！ 定咧就喺。
Well, initially our family were like in heaven, but then when our son told us that he's taking drugs, immediately I went to hell. What's this? You're taking drugs. You're not admitting. I'll call the police. No, please, no. Dad, Mom, please don't do that. Why don't we jump from a height and die and commit suicide? Well, I'll throw it away right away. Please don't call the police. Please. I dare not tell any relative. And my husband asked me to quit the job so that I can take care of him. But then, am I supposed to follow him to the toilet? And if he wants to take it, then it doesn't take a long time. He'll be able to do it. In fact, in my mind, I'd rather quit it. I did try, but then I was not able to do it. Well, for many times after taking drugs, I also attempted to throw them into the toilets and flush them. But then after I woke up again, or I became more alert, then I knew it's wrong. Well, your son better come up, or else we won't be held responsible. We trusted our son too much, and he spent all our savings in a year's time. All right, it's okay to sell them the drugs, and initially they would just take very little, and then afterwards, if they are able to make some money, so that would also help them solve the problem of meeting the expenses for taking drugs and their other expenses, then they became our distributors. As parents, definitely, you would allow him to go out after he back for a while, and he said that he would be back very soon. He'd just go out and buy a loaf of bread. But then you knew where he'd been. As parents, you will have to cherish your time, because after you've missed the critical time, then even if you are able to treat them and cure them, it's a waste of money. My son is taking drugs at home. If you help him to quit it early, then in terms of his brain, his neural system and everything, it won't hurt that much. Well, usually they don't know themselves too much, and therefore by setting up some cell groups would be able to help them understand themselves better, and then they would be able to think about their own future, and they would set themselves some targets and goals, and then they would move on more positively. Well, after my son came out, he looked really handsome, and I appreciate his figure, and I was very pleased to have such a handsome son. We hope that these friends can face the problem early. The earlier you are prepared to do it, the better, because you have a higher chance of success. All right, we have already shown the video. All right, over to you, Professor Shek. Yes, thank you, Chairman. We have a few more slides, so I'll be quick. I'll just go through that very quickly. All right, if you look at the scheme, we have taken reference from the drug driving and drink driving legislation. But then the difference is that under the drink driving and drug driving legislation, the LEA, the law enforcement agency, will have to have a reasonable ground or suspicion before he can take action. But then on this occasion, we also need to be able to locate some drugs nearby before we can take action. And there are a few issues that have to be addressed in the consultation. 8 questions. Basically, it's about whether or not you support it, and under what circumstances can the procedures be triggered, and also how should the procedures proceed, in particular about police powers. And also, would that apply to people of all ages, and how many opportunities should be given? And finally, we would also like the public to give us their views on this issue. Finally, I'd like to mention a few points which have to do with some of the sayings in the community. Well, something that taking drugs is not against the law. And if you read the South China Morning Post 2 weeks ago, there was an editorial saying that taking drugs is not against the law. It's not true, because in Hong Kong, taking drugs is a criminal offense. And we also have to note that after taking drugs, it's not just a personal behavior, because you're also going to affect others. I can give you some simple figures. If you look at the Castle Peak hospitals, substance abuse clinic, and they've analyzed some 800 cases. So 5% or 47 took drugs, and as a result, they also abused others. They assaulted others. So when compared to the situation between 2008 and 2012, because of drug driving and the casualties caused 27, in fact, is a lot higher, by 70%. We also have to note that some people, for the purpose of obtaining drugs, might be prepared to engage in illegal or illicit activities. And according to the WHO, there is like an epidemic. It's like an infectious disease, and also drug taking would also become a burden on healthcare expenses. In fact, during the past few years, both the administration and the NGO have conducted a number of studies. And in fact, there has been a worsening situation with regard to the age profile of drug takers. And therefore, the rescue drug testing scheme is an additional measure to help these drug abusers. Secondly, some might ask, all right, in doing this, is there any political motivation behind this? Well, we understand that there are concerns about police powers and whether or not there have been abuses of such powers. I'd like to emphasize that ACAN is an advisory body. We do not have any political motivation whatsoever. Our representatives come from different sectors, including the healthcare sector, the academia, and also social workers. We think that there is a need for us to think about whether or not we would like to take one step further as an additional measure to help solve the problem. As I've said repeatedly, we do not have any preconceived idea. We have an open mind. We would be all ears to public comments and opinions. Thank you. Commissioner, do you have anything to add? If not, then the floor is now open to members, and I've already got 10 members on the list. Anyone else? I'll read out the names. Dennis Kwok, Gary Chan, Emily Lau, Kwok Wai Kang, Ma Fong Kwok, Chen Chi Chang, Raymond Wong, Elizabeth Kwok, Yu Si Wing, Chung Kwok Pen, Chen Kin Paul, James To, Deputy Chairman. There are quite a number of you who would like to speak, so 5 minutes each. So please be precise and concise. So either ACAN members or the administration would be able to answer your questions. Dennis Kwok. Well, in Annex 1 of the Annex A of the paper, you talk about human rights considerations and how do you strike a balance between protecting human rights and doing this. So some queries have been raised, and for the legal sector, we are most concerned about this. Even if we were to introduce legislation, how are you going to position yourself? And also, how are you going to protect an individual's human rights, in particular those under the age of 18? So in terms of protecting human rights, what measures do you intend to introduce? And also, when compared to other common law jurisdictions, do they have similar schemes where the law enforcement agencies would be given similar powers of search? Well, for those under the age of 18, we would like to have an independent third party present. They can be parents, social workers, or even, if the police would like, if the public would like to suggest, there can also be parties that they would be prepared to trust. There is an example that is in Sweden. Well, very often when we look at Sweden, we find it strange. Well, Sweden is not a common law jurisdiction. No. All right, taking the example of Sweden, all right, they can be under the age of 18, and there can be an independent third party acting as an observer. Mr. Kwok, other than what you just said, there were no other examples that you can identify. So in drafting the provisions, do you have additional thinking on how human rights can be protected? Yes, Commissioner? Well, in the first point made by Mr. Kwok in the paper, we talk about the high threshold. That's the first proposal or recommendation. That is after the LEO notice that there is display of symptoms that the individual is under the influence of drugs. There are also other circumstantial conditions. For example, in the vicinity, drugs or dangerous drugs were located. So other than the fact that the person might look dizzy or puzzled, but then if no drug has been identified in the vicinity, then that would not be applicable. So that would also narrow the scope under which the LEO might be able to identify possible or potential drug abusers. But then we believe that in this regard, that would also serve as an additional safeguard as to those under the age of 18, according to Professor Sheck. Well, in the consultation paper, we have also mentioned that in terms of the approach to be adopted, well, there is a lot of room to maneuver. If there are comments from the community, for example, if you think that for those over the age of 18, is it not applicable? Well, if members have any comments, then we can also consider that. And of course, there are different circumstances, including how it can be enforced. For example, at what rank would the LEO be allowed to exercise the power, whether or not they have to be trained? So those are the details of implementation under the scheme. We have an open mind and we are prepared to listen to your views on these before we work out the details. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. Apparently, you're still in the very initial stage of preparing for this. For example, how human rights can be protected under the law. You haven't really come to those details. So what's the role of the DFJ? Has the DFJ given you any advice as to how the provisions should be drafted and how human rights can be protected? Have you consulted the DFJ? And can you give us a draft from the DFJ, Commissioner? Actually, this is still the first stage of consultation because we understand that in the community, they might have a lot of different views on this, and we've been maintaining very close liaison with the DFJ, including suggestions that on environmental or circumstantial conditions under which this would apply. We have had discussions with them. All right, Mr. Kwok has already made it clear. That is, you will have to consult the DFJ, and there must be something in writing so that the public can have a better understanding about this. Next, Gary Chen and then Emily Lau. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to join this discussion because I'm not a panel member. Last week, I went to a counseling center for drug abusers. I met a group of youngsters who had abused drugs, and I also met parents whose children also took drugs, and the children already had been taking drugs for 7 to 8 years, and some parents' children were only in the 20s, 30s, but then they had already got a very long history of taking drugs. And when I talk to them, parents generally hope that they would be able to identify or verify that their children had been using drugs early so that they'll be able to take early action for treatment and counseling services. So I hope that, Commissioner and Professor, when you undertake to do this, well, you will have to do this drug testing, and the purpose is to help those who are taking drugs. And I think this is very much the wish of the parents and the young people, and this is a very positive message that they'd like to send to you. And when I talk to them, I noticed that there are actually two windows. Number one, when parents identify or notice that their children might be taking drugs, or that they have already confirmed that their children have been taking drugs, and they feel very helpless, and whatever they can do, they have already done so. And yet they have no idea as to what they can do.
they may not be able to find a social worker. So from the discovery of the problem to the time when they receive assistance, they need support. So how can we assist them in this so-called vacuum period? This is the first important issue. The second issue related to this vacuum period is that after treatment, when a young person wants to find a job and would like to be away from drugs, Professor Sheck, I believe in this vacuum period is best for that young person to receive assistance. The shorter the so-called vacuum period, the better. On page 13 in paragraph G, there are 3 short paragraphs about this period. So our ultimate objective is to help these young people. If we have so few support services, how can we address this deficiency? Or does the ACAN have other thoughts? For parents, children, or NGOs, how can we enhance our services? This is very important. Professor, as the Commissioner just said, we're only in the first phase of the consultation exercise. Basically, we have a framework and some questions to consult the public. Mr. Chan mentioned support for parents. We totally agree. In the next stage, we'll write out the details. We'll proceed to another stage of consultation. By then, members will know more about the contents of the scheme and will invite views from the public. Thank you. Commissioner, thank you, Chairman. As for Mr. Chan's questions, it's not just about rescue or DRT. We should consider the general support for parents in society. Overall speaking, we can see a few major aspects. In our community, we have 11 institutions that are dedicated to counseling support. One of the eligibility criteria is that those around the drug abusers can receive support. Maybe we do not know enough about these support services. In the past few years, we would like to mobilize the local community to do more parental education. Apart from the drug problem, we would like them to know where they can obtain help. For example, the anti-drug fund does have subvention for supportive plans. And this helpline of 186 186, we've always been enhancing our publicity on it so that more people will know of the helpline. Professor Sheck, I think the answer has already been given. Ms. Emily Lau and then Mr. Kotwaiker. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank the administration for giving us supplementary information on the non-official members of ACAN, because we would like to know who drafted the document and who are making the recommendations. Mr. Chairman, many members of the public told us that they're very worried and they have strong comments. They asked whether we'll convene a public hearing. We understand that there are 4 sessions in October with 300 participants. And Mr. Chairman, please allow deputations and individuals to come and air their views. With the age of drug abuse is dropping and the number of drug abusers, young drug abusers, has been increasing. But there's no explanation about this phenomenon. The Undersecretary has been discussing this with me. I asked whether or not we can provide some positive culture and positive leisure and cultural activities for young people to participate. For example, community halls can be open later, till later at night, so that people can go there to swim, etc. And then if any parent discovers a problem, assistance should be provided. And we should deal with these conflicts between police rights or police powers and human rights. Can we have something positive to handle the problem? And 25, 26, 27, 28, here you see a lot of opposing voices. So we're very worried. And human rights have to be addressed. And then we see this problem of hidden drug abusers. They're trying to hide away from you. So after listening to views, will you consider softer, healthier, and more positive strategies to handle the problem? Professor Sheikh, do you emphasize arrest only? Well, Mr. Chairman, we have positive attitude and services. We're now talking about an extra mechanism. The existing services won't be replaced. And the spirit of rehabilitation is not to arrest, but to rescue. So basically, we don't want to arrest these people. We want them to get rid of drugs. As for hidden drug abusers, many friends have been discussing this with us. In fact, very rarely do drug abusers take drugs on their own. They take drugs as groups. So when you discover drug abusers, you see that the whole group is very confused. That's why we're proposing a drug test in schools, and we would like to detect the problem as early as possible. Well, Mr. Chairman, Professor Sheikh said that they're already doing something positive. Then why is it that the drug age has been dropping and the number of drug abusers has been rising? Mr. Chairman, the drug problem is very complicated. Family problems, personal mentality, etc., may cause a person to take drugs. Now, this is different from opium or heroin, because taking those drugs can be detected very quickly. Well, the urinary bladder as well as the mental state will be affected most. I'll defer to the doctor. Well, I've been serving as a frontliner for 15 years, and I have been dealing with ketamine. In the past 10 years, the drug treatment services of Hong Kong have evolved from a passive mode to an active mode. That is, we proactively visit youth centers, outreaching premises, to invite them to undergo medical checkups. So the number of drug treatment cases has actually risen, but the successful rate is only 30%. That is, 70% of drug abusers won't voluntarily go for drug treatment. But if they continue for 5 to 6 years, their bladder may already be damaged. So we have voluntary services, but we would like to have another intervention point to prevent these people from falling seriously ill. Otherwise, for their whole life, they have to receive treatment. And very often, parents want them to get rid of drugs, but alongside treatment, these abusers continue to take drugs. So early intervention is good, and then we should promise them that there would not be any criminal record. So in the past, only 30% voluntarily went for drug treatment. We would like to increase that rate. Next, Mr. Kwok Wai Keung and then Mr. Ma Fung Kwok. Mr. Chairman, this consultation document targets 3 aspects. First of all, before new initiatives are implemented, there are already hidden drug abusers. So there is no question of this arrangement causing the number of hidden drug abusers to drop, all along with hidden drug abusers. Secondly, we'd like to help them as soon as possible. Don't wait till their brains are totally damaged and they're severely ill. Don't wait till it is too late. So we're competing with time. Thirdly, in general, the motivation of seeking help on the part of drug abusers is low. Well, unless parents are helpless, unless they've caused confusion and chaos at home, unless they have committed crimes, they won't come forward for drug treatment. So, members of the public do agree that we should do something about these 3 aspects. As our colleague said, drug tests will involve human rights issues. I can see that you are basically adopting the approach for drug driving, which has proved to have worked well. So, is it worthwhile? Well, you may say that drug driving may affect others, but not taking drugs itself. That's not true. Earlier, I asked somebody to carry out a survey for me. Thefts, robbery, other crimes like participation in drug trafficking or fabrication of false credit cards, etc., etc., had been crimes committed by drug abusers. In the past 30 years, there was this girl who spent her years in prison. So the community will be affected. And then they are actually sustaining the drug traffickers. So from source to the downstream level, if we can do something about drug abusers, we'll be doing good to law and order as well. If unfortunately in a sudden check or raid, there are doubts and suspicion, are there any avenues for complaints or redress? Because sometimes the law enforcement officers may make mistakes when they're very busy. At present, drug taking is an offense. Apparently, on the first arrest or detection, the person won't be arrested. It seems that that person will be given a first chance. He will be sent to drug treatment either voluntarily or involuntarily. Is this written into the laws already? Now, drug taking is an offense at the moment. When they're first detected in law, will they be allowed a first chance? Ms. Emily Lau mentioned a public hearing. I support a public hearing. As for timing, it's not too urgent. The consultation period will last till the 24th of January. I think we should allow the Narcotics Division to collate information first before we call a public hearing. That will be more pragmatic. Professor Shek, at present, there is already an avenue for complaint. IPCC is an example. For drug driving, we've checked, and as far as we know, there's not been any arrest. I think the police were very careful in balancing police powers and human rights. In law, there may be problems. So precisely in this consultation exercise, we'd like to ask society what they think about this proposed DRT scheme, and we would like to have a mechanism to allow the scheme to be operated legitimately. Mr. Ma Fung Kwok. Mr. Chairman, I've read the document. The problem is really very serious before these proposals are put forward for consultation. So it is necessary that we have this rescue drug testing scheme. Now, I'd like to ask a question. If you want to legislate, you should not target young people, such that young people will feel that the system is fair. So we should be more concerned about the high-risk group when it comes to law enforcement. And then the second question is whether or not we should give them more opportunities. If there are more opportunities, the problem of hidden drug abuses can be resolved better.
Well, after prosecution is taken out, if they accept the scheme, and after a while, if it's proven that they are not taking drugs at all, then we can also allow them to turn over a new leaf by removing their record. I think that would also encourage both themselves and their family members to seek help. So I wonder if the administration is prepared to consider this. And also on the concern for police abuse of power, I think our police force is a very professional team, and there are checks and balances, and if they abuse their power, we will be able to find out. But then should we do this as a pilot scheme in order to see if it's effective, and if people resist this drug testing scheme, can we involve the intermediaries and also certain committee system in order to enhance their confidence that the scheme will not be abused, Professor? Well, Mr. Ma made a number of suggestions. All of them will be considered carefully, and that's the spirit of the consultation exercise, because we are all ears to all suggestions in terms of the age profile, whether we can involve some NGOs in the process and so on. It's not a problem at all. We'll note that and we'll consider them. Yes, Commissioner? Anything to add? No? Mr. Ma? Well, how about removing their offense records? Well, under the law, after you have taken drugs, basically it's already a criminal offense and you have a criminal record. So, and all you're proposing is that after they have voluntarily offered to quit the drug, then their criminal record can also be removed. All right, on the second or on a repeat offense, you can also convict them and make sure that there would be a criminal offense. Well, to me, if you strike 2, then you're out. I think that would be better. But then we do not have any preconceived ideas, and we'll listen to public comments first, and then in the second stage, we'll work out more details. Yes, Mr. Raymond Chan, and then Raymond Wong. Chairman, I'd like to discuss the logic about this first. All right, when crime rate is down, then there is no reason why they should increase police manpower, unless you anticipate that something major is going to happen. And if you look at the RDT, all right, the name sounds good because you're helping people to turn over a new leaf, but then the substance is that you're actually trying to broaden police powers in order to introduce this drug testing scheme. If you look at the statistics, actually, the population is coming down, and therefore, I think we should commend Professor Sheck for doing a remarkable job. But then apparently, you're suggesting that they are becoming more hidden, so the problem is not shrinking. And if they do not take the initiative to seek help, then they will have to be intercepted by law enforcement officers, and then they will be found out. So I think you're having the best of both worlds, actually. If the figures come down, you say that they are becoming more hidden. That's why you're asking for more funds and manpower, and then you're actually asking for more power so that you can go in and search them. And you're actually suggesting that even for those between 16 and 26, you can also have the power to search them. In fact, the Medical Association called a press conference last Sunday, and they were very clear. They said that they are strongly against it. So they just use these words. I think you have misused this medication, because number one, they think that people will become more hidden in taking drugs, and they think that the administration should eliminate drug at source. So you should go after the drug dealers instead of the drug takers. And Dr. Chair, from the Medical Association said that even he would have difficulty identifying whether or not somebody is abusing psychotropic drugs or taking alcohol or whatever. So can you take the opportunity to respond to the allegation by the Medical Association? My stance is the same as that of the Medical Association. I don't know if the Medical Association is wrong or Professor Scheck is wrong. I think after 1997, police powers are growing and human rights are actually diminishing. So I think this is a fact for all to see. It's not for the pro-establishment camp members to say that is not the case. In fact, there is also no effective checks and balances in place, and therefore to just arbitrarily broaden police powers against human rights, I think unless it's absolutely necessary, we should not be prepared to give it. Professor Scheck, thank you. Mr. Chen, I'd like to respond to the point about the Medical Association. I think the Medical Association does not have any idea as to how we conduct drug testing on drug driving. I think if they had known it, they would not have made those allegations. They should have been to the police station to see how it's done. All right, if you're suspected of drug driving, then number one, you will have to do this breathalyzer test to find out if your alcoholic content or concentration in blood has exceeded the threshold, and then they would also be charging you for taking drugs, and they would not be charging you for drug driving. And also the Medical Association said that we have actually misapplied the medication, but then I've also known some branches of the Medical Association, they are in support of this RDT, so it doesn't matter. I think we can have more professional and academic discussion. It doesn't really matter. As regards whether or not this is an initiative to widen police powers, I've been sitting on the IPCC for 6 years. I'm also very concerned about human rights. And as I just said, if you look at drink driving and drug driving, for the two pieces of legislation after they have come into effect, we have not received a single case of complaint. I'm not speaking on behalf of the police, and I would not pretend to be their spokesperson. I'm just stating a fact and also the figure. As regards how we can avoid broadening police power, as I said, we have an open mind. We'd like to listen to your views. And finally, I'd like to quote a figure. Through social workers or welfare agencies trying to identify these drug abusers, the average drug history would be 5.2 years. In other words, they've already taken drugs for 5.2 years before we are able to reach out to them through these welfare agencies. But then through LEOs, the average drug history is 2.6 years. In other words, if we were able to identify them through law enforcement officers, then would be able to identify them early, and that's precisely the spirit of this RDT scheme. All right, Dr. Zhang, Commissioner, I'll just make one point, Chairman, is about eliminating drugs at source. I think all along in our fight against drugs, we all know it very well. That is, we will have to tackle the problem at source, and under the five-pronged approach in anti-drug policy, well, in targeting drug and drug abuse, well, targeting drug at source has always been a very important measure, and we also hope that our legislation can also catch up with the need. That's all I'd like to say. Yes, Dr. Zhang, I'd like to respond to the logic made by Mr. Chen. Well, for the general public, they may not have a very good understanding of this. That is, under the CRDA, the Central Registry of Drug Abuse, is a reporting mechanism, and the number only mostly show the methadone users and also criminal offenders who have been reported. But then for ketamine and other soft drugs, the number would be rather small. And in fact, that also shows that there has been a change in the drug-taking habit. And it's not just about the decline in figure. And therefore, if there are fewer people taking heroin, that figure would definitely drop. It doesn't necessarily reflect the actual situation of people abusing soft drugs. And as Dr. Zhang has already explained about the drug history of these drug users. But then for the drug users that we have identified, in fact, the drug history would be a bit longer. In the past, it used to be 1 to 2 years, and now it's 3-4 years or even longer. And then, as many doctors would have told you, the longer you have taken drugs, the more harm, and it'll be even more difficult to quit drugs. That's why we are worried about this. And this scheme is precisely targeting at this problem. So we are trying to come up with a way to identify these people earlier. We are not trying to arrest them. We are trying to help them quit drugs. So that's what we are trying to do. I think logically this is reasonable. Yes, Raymond Wong, and then Elizabeth Quat. Thank you, Chairman. The Medical Association said that it's difficult to implement, so that's their view. And they are also saying that you're applying the wrong medication to treat the symptoms. And they are saying that it's difficult to implement. And also, well, the more you try to deal with it, actually you're making things worse. So in terms of the approach, they say that you have applied the wrong approach. And number two, when it comes to actual enforcement, it's difficult to enforce. And even if it's done with good intention, it's difficult to enforce. And thirdly, well, when you try to deal with a problem, actually you're creating more problems than solving them. Well, some time ago, I already said that I'm against it, but then I also tried to discuss with them some technical issues and the practical difficulties in implementing them. And later on, I'll also be writing a paper, and I'll be coming up with a detailed paper. And today, with limited time, I'm going to look at it from the legal perspective. We do have a number of barristers here. I don't know what they think about this. Well, in the past, in the course of criminal proceedings, after the accused has been convicted, only at the time or at the stage of sentencing will they be required to undergo drug testing. That's a statutory or mandatory procedure by court, and the court would be very cautious in doing so. And the law enforcement agencies or officers without proper training should not be given this power to mandate or compel people to undergo drug testing. All right, how are you going to train up these LEOs? And number two, under the common law, you have this presumption of innocence, and that is also protected by the basic law, and it's also a right enshrined under the ICCPC. And before conviction, if you require the suspect to undergo drug testing, it's like asking the defendant to prove their innocence. This will undermine the presumption of innocence principle under the common law, and also is not for the defendant to prove their innocence, it's for the prosecution to prove their guilt. And of course, you're saying that I'm not going to prosecute him, and after the drug testing, I will be there to help him. All right, this is a gray area. And also before conviction or before sentencing, if you require the defendant to undergo drug testing, that's also against the basic law, because it provides that Hong Kong residents would not be subject to arbitrary arrest, and if you try to search them, and if you try to restrict their freedom of movement, and if you try to deprive them of any right, that would also be against the basic law. So there is a chance that you might be breaching Article 28 of the Basic Law, and in the course of enforcing this, and if there are problems, then actually we can ask the court to interpret the Basic Law. All right, I'm not saying that what you are thinking is wrong or that the motive is wrong, but then as I said, you might actually be creating more problems than solving them. So you might be making things worse. All right, for an ordinary citizen, all right, they do not have the means to take you to court, but then for people with means, they'll be able to take you to court. And also you'll be referring the cases to the social workers and healthcare professionals. Well, that's worthy of consideration. But then when it comes to actual implementation, the recommendation would undermine the defendant's right to maintain or to remain silent. And all the counseling work that follows will be futile. So have you considered this? And also, the consultation paper says that after the referral, the suspect will be prosecuted, and then will be concerned that, well, in terms of the communication between the individual and the social workers and healthcare workers, so would that constitute evidence to be referred to in the course of prosecution? That's why in the consultation document you say that, all right, the LEA will be keeping the records of those who have been tested positive in past testing. And if those would be adduced in court for the reference by the court, then that would also challenge the fact that the presumption of innocence principle would be challenged. And also, that would also send out the wrong message to the public. That is for first-time offenders, and even if you take drugs, you might not be prosecuted right away. So that would also be the message that would be sent out. And as the professor just said, taking drugs is an offense. But then, in doing this, you're actually sending out the wrong message for the first-time drug abusers. They think that it's not against the law, and they would not be prosecuted.
Well, let me finish. I'm only 10 odd seconds late. Now, you have to consider this very carefully. I'll let you respond to each and every point. I only have 5 minutes. This time I'm asking about the legal aspect. Thank you. Mr. Wong has done a great deal of homework. He has spoken for 5 minutes. There's no time for the professor to respond. That's not very appropriate. 1 minute for you, Professor. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Yok Man. As for the points he has raised, I've actually written in newspapers in response. The whole issue is based on the drug driving framework. If you say that's unconstitutional and unlawful, then the drug driving regime, regulatory regime, is also unlawful and unconstitutional. Now, drug driving may kill. Same with drug taking, drug abuse. We don't want to wait till it is too late before we legislate. Dr. Elizabeth Quat and then Mr. U.C. Wing. Mr. Chairman, earlier in the psychiatric department, I had 1 year internship following Dr. Cheung on getting rid of drug abuse. I assisted 80-odd young people to get rid of drug taking in that year. And social workers got young drug abusers into the hospital to beg them to get rid of drugs. However, alongside treatment, these young abusers continued to take drugs. So it's difficult to say whether or not the move was successful. It's most saddening to see that just taking drug once or twice had rendered these young abusers very weak in their health, and there's no turning back. Over 80% of those young drug abusers were from problematic families. So I personally support this scheme. Early identification, early intervention, and early assistance coupled with mandatory assistance are necessary. The thinking ability of young abusers is damaged, and self-control and self-ability to combat drugs are very weak. So we need the scheme, and without family members' help, it's very difficult to help them get rid of drug abuse. I understand that some people are worried about excessive police powers. They're worried that human rights might be affected. Well, just now we already heard that drug taking is no different from drug driving and drink driving. The best solution is to identify these people and provide assistance to them. That's most important. I'd like to say something about downstream support. My experience in the hospital is that for psychiatric services, government support for young abusers had been very little. I'd like to know whether there had been any improvement. For youth psychiatric services, young people had to queue up for several years in Prince of Wales Hospital. And upon identification, do we have sufficient support for young abusers and their parents in helping their children on this very difficult path? And you talked about chances. How many chances are you going to give young abusers? If you give them chances, will they repeat drug taking? Professor Shek, I'd like to thank Dr. Kwok for her comments. I'd like to respond to 2 points. For downstream support, we have to understand that in the past few years, the administration had been injecting a great deal of funds in that regard. We have 11 centers, and we had got 100 additional social workers. To identify these young abusers, we need support, we need ancillary measures and facilities. On public occasions, I repeatedly said that the Narcotics Division is duty-bound to provide support and make arrangements. As for the last point of Dr. Kwok, I very much agree. We have to be very careful not to give the public a wrong impression. For a 20-odd-year-old, don't give him the impression that he should try at least once before going for treatment. We fully understand that possibility. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Yu Si-wing, and then Mr. Chen Kin-po. Thank you, Chairman. Paragraph 7 of the paper mentions the median age of reported cases that has increased one-fold, that is, doubled. So I'd like to know the actual number of persons involved. And then the ACAN conducted 4 consultation sessions. We could see that parents are very concerned about their children. Very often we say that human rights are more important than children problems. But I personally think that the younger generation is more important. As for our concerns, I'd like to know in those 4 consultation sessions what the attitude of the parents was and what's the rate of support you got. My third question is, if this mandatory test is approved, in paragraph 3 of Appendix 1, it is said that if the reaction is positive, the person will have 3 choices. I would opt for mandatory treatment. For caution, the young person may just opt for caution. The most important thing is to give a chance of rehabilitation to the young person. So apart from a mandatory test, can we also have a mandatory rehabilitation scheme with participation of social workers? The police is duty-bound to carry out investigation, and the police should play a role in the rehabilitation process such that the whole issue is taken care of from start to end. Professor Shek, every year over 10,000 persons have been reported. I believe the Narcotics Division can give you the exact figure after the meeting. I think we're talking about the average drug abuse age. By 2012, the median period is 12 years. Mr. Yu is concerned about parents' reaction. In those consultation sessions, we did not ask about the background of the participants, for example, whether or not they're parents. This afternoon, an NGO will publish the result of a survey. They asked whether the parents would support the scheme. And this morning, I talked to David Chung, the person responsible. The parents were very supportive of early identification of young drug abusers. And we often carried out public opinion polls. Of course, we did not ask the ask about the details, for example, whether or not they're parents, but we asked about their views. We listened to different views. You mentioned mandatory treatment. We'll put that on record. As for police participation, perhaps I don't want the police to follow up on cases for too long. First of all, this involves police resources. I think we only need them to identify the cases, and the abuser should be referred to medical and health personnel. Maybe that's more appropriate, but we'll follow up on your suggestion. Commission, some information for Mr. Yu Si Wing. In hand, the figures I have is like for 2010, 2011, and 2012. Overall reported abusers, around 12,500, dropping to around 11,000 in 2012. And the number of abusers below the age of 11 has also been dropping around 20%. I mean, below 21%. And for the age group 21 to 30 years old, the percentage is about 20. I participated in a discussion among social workers. In that discussion, an issue was raised. In handling drug abuse cases, professional training is very much required. I think we have to differentiate between an offender and a victim or a patient. My friends around me are of the view that we should pass such cases from the police to those who can provide counseling, be it doctors, nurses, social workers, or other professionals. Apparently, the general view is that that's more appropriate. Mr. Chan Kim-po and then Mr. James Stowe. Mr. Chairman, I very much support the scheme. Drug abuse is really very harmful. I find it strange that it's not raised just now that ketamine taker had been killing people, damaging themselves, wounding people, etc., etc. So logically, it's as harmful as drug driving. So the earlier the identification, the earlier we can assist these young people and prevent them from harming their own bodies and health. Well, our medical system is already overburdened. If we have tens of thousands of these people who need social care, it will add to the burden of society, and elderly services may also be affected. Now, this is from the standpoint of society. But of course, as you said, as parents, when 90% of parents support the scheme. So, don't talk in a vacuum. We'll try to think that you have such children, then you won't speak as you have spoken. Human rights are important, but other things are important. It's important to prevent members of society being harmed, victimized. We should prevent people from harming themselves as well. Well, human rights is quite another issue. I find it strange that we have such controversies. I think you and Dr. Tse Hong Hing should understand this very clearly. Is it that all members of the Medical Association agree with Dr. Tse Hong Hing? I think many doctors do not agree with Dr. Tse. I think you should try to understand why he is opposing. You should give him more information. Very often misunderstandings arise from unclear explanation. With support from the Medical Association, it will be better. And then paragraph 14 talks about the cost of drug taking, or half that of Canada. How did you arrive at that figure? $11 billion, averaging 1,400 per capita. So please tell us how you arrived at that figure. Now, if this is to continue and the government does not take strong action, how many people will stay in hospitals for a long, long time, and in the long run, what will be the overall additional medical costs incurred? Professor Sheikh, well, for the Medical Association, we did talk to them previously. We keep in communication with them. There's mutual respect, no problem. We're willing to continue to discuss and exchange views with them. One thing is important. That is evidence. Now, how did we arrive at $11 billion? Professor Chang Yu-Hua of the Chinese University carried out a research. He looked into the direct costs and indirect costs.
Well, this is also an internationally recognized approach. And I am grateful to your question because I know many doctors and they're beginning to say this to me. That is, all of a sudden, if there are a few more dozen patients seeking treatment because of their urinary bladder, and in fact, there have been many cases who have to receive intensive care treatment. So as you just said, they would be using up the resources by depriving others of the proper use of such beds. And if you need that, we can also calculate the cost. Dr. Zhang, a very simple follow-up. Number one, the Medical Association only represented the council members' views because they have not conducted an extensive consultation amongst its members. So I can only say that they are only representing council members' views because I'm a member of the Medical Association. I've never been consulted. There's no circulation of paper to consult us. So can you clarify that they are only representing themselves? Well, yes, they represent the Medical Association's views, but then they have not consulted all medical doctors in Hong Kong. And also with regard to drug abusers statistics and also for SACs throughout the territory, according to some studies, well, some 58%, close to 60% of them also are suffering from psychosis, and some 30% of them are actually taking psychotropic drugs. And because of this, for those requiring intensive care, well, there was an increase by 9.8 times, and that's in response to an earlier point that this is a very pressing issue that can afford no further delays. Yes, Commissioner, well, you asked about the medical costs that could entail. We haven't done that projections, but then we can also take the opportunity to provide more information. We can see that the problem is getting worse. We haven't yet seen the end, the light at the end of the tunnel. Recently, well, ACAN provided, or the Beat Drugs Fund provided funds for some studies, and during the first stage, some 200 ketamine drug abusers were researched, and well, some of them have actually got a very long drug history, and some are over the age of 30 already. And if you look at the profile of these drug abusers, in fact, 60% of them, after taking ketamine for 6 years, if you look at the urinary bladder, the capacity is only 1/6 of an ordinary person. And for the worst case, actually, the capacity is only about 9 ml, is about a 2 teaspoonful. And then there is a more recent finding, and earlier on, many of these discussions have not really touched on that, and they are beginning to find out that some 40% out of the 200 respondents, in fact, their liver also suffered. They are actually suffering from infection of the liver, and and according to the doctors, after they have displayed such symptoms, we can see that the situation or the condition will deteriorate in the next few years, and they could even suffer from liver cancer. So other than urinary bladder that may suffer, actually liver would also suffer. And also for those abusing ketamine on a very extensive scale, in fact, we have a larger number of such cases, and for such medical statistics, we are beginning to well, regrettably, we have been we are becoming a testing ground for that. All right, James Toh and another member are on the queue, but then they are not in the room right now. So before we start the second round, I also have some questions and comments to share. I support this scheme. Initially, that's my view. I've also spent 6 years in ACAN, and in the process, very often we worked with Professor Sheck, and for many years we hope that we would be able to do something to help the drug abusers so that they can quit this habit as soon as possible. Just now, Mr. Raymond Chan said that logically it's a problem because how come the figures are coming down and now you are actually asking for more resources and you're doing more? But then I think this is something that cannot be tolerated because when it comes to drug abuse, in particular, it's affecting the younger population. After they have changed their drug-taking habit, the harm that can be done to the younger generation would become even more serious, as Professor Sheck and other ACAN members have said. If you look at the impact, you're actually talking about bodily harm, and it's a very serious problem. So if we can identify early so that they can be given early assistance, I think it's being responsible to the younger generation and being responsible to the community at large. It's not a simple problem involving just themselves. Well, after they have taken drugs, they can do a lot of harmful things. They could also become aggressive. Yes, with regard to the concerns raised by some members, the administration will have to look into that very carefully. You will have to seek legal advice. But then for drug driving, it's already implemented. I think conceptually, there isn't much difference from that. It's not really against human rights, according to my understanding. I don't think that would give rise to human rights abuse. But of course, I'm all for seeking more legal advice. My question is as follows. Just now, you said that in the course of enforcing the law, you have to have enough training. What does that mean? Well, for the LEOs or police officers, will they be able to receive training in advance? Would that be difficult to do? Well, not all police officers can require people to undergo drug driving test. They will have to undergo a week or so's training, and it's rather intensive. They also have to pass an examination, and it's an internationally recognized test. In the UK, certain authorized groups will offer the test, and so not all police officers will be allowed to do the test. And also, in undertaking this test, there are also some standardized instructions, and they will have to get clearance from the DFJ, and they will have to read out the script, and that would also have to be videotaped by 2 CCTVs, so that in taking the evidence, everything will be recorded in order to safeguard the interests of all the parties concerned. Mr. James To, Chairman, I'd like to ask some fundamental I'd like to seek some fundamental information. According to the administration, drug abuse is a criminal offense under the current criminal code. So for how many years, how many decades? In which you have not been able to identify any drugs nearby, and yet you have been able to prosecute somebody for abuse of drugs. Have you got any such cases? Well, the number is very small. Have you got such a case? Yes. But then, when is the last case whereby no drug was seized and yet the person was convicted of drug taking? All right. Well, if you spot the person taking ice, then you can prosecute him for drug taking. In other words, even under the de minimis approach, that is, even a small quantity of ice cannot be identified, and yet you're prosecuting that individual for taking drugs. Have you done that before? Professor Sheck, yes, we had a number of those cases. We have checked with the police. Well, in some cases, well, the individual might have taken drugs and he passed out, and he was admitted to the A&E department, and blood tests will be carried out. And after he woke up again, he would be asked if permission would be given for the healthcare professionals to read the report, and then after the report was out, then he would be prosecuted. Yes, Commissioner, I can provide some information here. Other than what Professor Sheikh just said, there were some examples. Yes, the number was small. Indeed, we tried to get some figures from the police. Well, looking at the first half of 2013, for those drug-related cases prosecution, there were 2,200 cases, about 2,200 cases, and only some 26 cases were related to abuse of drugs or taking of drugs. In fact, the ratio is very low. In 2012, we talk about some 2,000 plus drug-related prosecutions. In fact, for drug taking, it's only about 2,000 or so. So the figure is on the low side. Chairman, can I continue? Yes. Number one, if you say that drug taking is an offense, and then in the future, in terms of your policy and measures, you would be prosecuting people for taking drugs. So in the past few decades, you were concerned that by prosecuting people for taking drugs, you would be driving people underground. So how do you reconcile the two policies? Number two, you have to have an individual who is forced to provide information to you, and then you would prosecute him. During the past few days, the Hong Kong Medical Association came out, said that they would be fundamentally against this. Alright, ACAN also had some legal representatives sitting on the committee. Alright, if you look at our rule book, we are staunchly against mandating an individual to provide you with evidence so that you can prosecute him. Alright, in many pieces of legislation, you can compel people to give you evidence, but then you will be using that information for other users instead of on that individual himself. But then you're forcing this individual to provide you with information, and then you can use the information to prosecute this individual. And you're actually talking about your own physical condition, unless it's used in some very, very serious criminal cases. But then when compared to other cases, you're actually talking about an individual taking drug himself. You can treat it as a very serious condition. Is it proportional? Dr. Zhang? Well, I'm in the front line. I might have come across people who are suffering from schizophrenia as a result of drug taking. In fact, the legislative intent is based on drink driving and drug driving, because during the same period of time for drug abusers, whether or not they are harming themselves, alright, sometimes they might throw objects from the rooftop, or they might be chopping up people, or they might be setting fire on buildings and so on. Well, if you look at the number of such cases, the number is a lot larger than that of drug driving and drink driving. If you ask the Castle Peak hospital case, then in fact most of these cases have been admitted to the hospital, and if they fell to their death, then nobody would be able to tell that that might have to do with drug taking. But then if you look at somebody throwing an object from the rooftop, because he might not be able to tell who they are, and are we able to guarantee that this will continue to be a safe city? And if drug driving is a scheme that is justified, then why not for this? Alright, this person is harming himself, and you're saying that you're making this analogy. It's like him driving and hurting or knocking down people, and also because of people trying to stab people, and then you should be prosecuting him for stabbing people instead of prosecuting him for taking drugs. And then for drug driving, you can also prosecute him. Well, drug driving is very serious because you're driving a car and you are knocking people to their deaths. But then it's like taking drug, and then if you stab people afterwards, then you can be prosecuted for stabbing people rather than taking drugs. Well, Castle Peak Hospital did an analysis recently. Out of the 800 cases, in fact 47 cases, because they took drugs and they got became abusive, and they actually hurt themselves and others. And when compared to the figures in the past 5 years, if you look at the figures for drug driving and drink driving, it's 70% higher. Well, for other people, they might think that this is an individual or personal problem. It's not going to affect others. This is precisely the contrary. And if you think deeper, in fact, if you take drugs, you can affect many other people. Just now, Dr. Zhang said that it's like throwing objects from the rooftop. In fact, we have heard that from time to time.
Dr. Fernando Zhang. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just now downstairs there are some other activities. This DRT scheme is really controversial. Some colleagues mentioned public hearings. Mr. Chairman, I hope that you can arrange public hearings. Just now, the Medical Association announced their position. We should not neglect that position because they're professionals. Dr. Cheng is here, coincidentally. Now, there are two conditions. First of all, prima facie evidence. The police can make a professional judgment that that person had taken drugs. The second evidence is that there are drugs around. If these two conditions are satisfied, the police will have the power to ask that person to undergo a urine test. But according to the professional bodies, that's not a professional judgment. Not even a doctor can make such a judgment. So the first condition is not substantiated. I wonder whether Dr. Cheng can respond to this point. It's necessary for him to respond. The second condition is detection of drugs around. Is there any definition? If drugs are discovered in the vicinity, then the police can prosecute the person. That may lead to abuse of police powers. Well, yes, society has advanced. We now have the IPCC. Still, regulation of police powers is limited. So, this scheme may not be helpful in guarding against excessive police powers. And then there is this question of whether or not services can catch up. Now, we're talking about short-term residential care. Is there still a queue? Well, I'm talking about Zhangshan. In fact, they burst to their seams. Well, even counseling services have a queue. People are queuing up. Now, if DRT is adopted, more drug abusers are detected, but you cannot provide services to them, and they have to queue up even for residential service. Then, can the Commissioner tell us whether or not existing services are adequate? If they are not adequate, will this test cause the problem to deteriorate? Commissioner, perhaps I should say something about the existing services, and then Professor Shek and his team can answer the other questions. According to information in hand, 80% of those who have to queue up for various treatment services, they have to queue up for less than 2 weeks. As for residential treatment services, like Zhangshan, the intake rate now is only 60%. That means recipients of these services are dropping in number. If we purely look at the existing services, there is definitely room for receiving more. Of course, Dr. Zhang asked whether follow-up services will be enough if this scheme is to be implemented. This document has not touched upon a certain aspect, that is, the approach of follow-up. How should we go about it? At this stage, we still need to discuss how we should go about follow-up services. Later, when there are detailed discussions and there's consensus in society, then we can see how resources should be put into the scheme. Professor Sheck said that they're going to strive for more resources. The administration agreed that ACAN should carry out this consultation. So, as far as possible, we'll strive for more resources. Professor Sheck, I'll try to answer Fernando's question on the Medical Association. In fact, I mentioned this just now. You're not here. The Medical Association does not understand how the frontliners enforce the law. For drunk driving, they don't just look at drunk driving. They will also test for the alcoholic level. And then they will first prosecute the person for drink driving before drunk driving. So it's not true that not even a doctor can differentiate the person has taken excessive alcohol or taken drugs. In fact, the Medical Association does not understand what the frontliners are doing. In fact, your concern is also mine. That's about the balance between police powers and human rights in the vicinity. Now, in future, if we are to legislate, the law will make this very clear. If somebody throws a chalk at you, or if I've taken a donut with sugar around my mouth, will police officers suspect that you have taken ice? Well, I dare not rule out that possibility. Last time, when I visited a drug treatment center, I asked the police officers whether or not there were false positive results. The police told me they had no record of such cases. So it depends on the professional judgment and training of the police. Well, of course, having said that, I'm not saying that balance between police powers and human rights is not important. We're on the same line on this issue. Dr. Zhang, very simple. Dr. Zhe was not speaking from the standpoint of a professional doctor. It takes a psychiatrist to differentiate whether or not the person is drugged. In fact, laboratories can differentiate between alcohol and drugs. A paper was published. Overseas jurisdictions also published papers about such training. Because, yes, with my naked eye, I can't differentiate whether you have taken alcohol or drugs. But with professional training, with 90% accuracy, the professionals can differentiate between drug taking and drink and alcohol taking. So overseas jurisdictions do have such literature. Well, you're talking about police officers, not professional doctors or specialists. Well, in overseas jurisdictions like the UK with training, the accuracy rate was 90%. Mr. Lam Kwok Hong, because of the Zhangshan case, I received complaints from Kaifongs about their children taking drugs. In fact, it's not necessary for you to arrest them. They want to get rid of drugs. They say they've had enough. Can you help me get rid of drugs? Well, they are excreting blood at home. For the hidden drug abusers, you use this as an excuse to enter secondary schools to test students for drug taking. If it is a good school, the teachers will be able to detect abnormal behavior of students. And what about after service? where should we put our resources? It's rubbish to say that after we have detected the abusers, the after services will come and resources will come. After the Zhongshan incident, did you rectify yourselves? Did you inject resources into drug treatment services such that drug addicts get appropriate services? Now, with this scheme, you're asking people to come forward to plead guilty. There's only one conclusion for this consultation document. Now, please, in future, you definitely stop to identify the hidden drug abusers because you don't have enough resources. That's absurd for this government. The public opinion is saying that drug-taking students should be detected and assisted. Yes, there are many hidden drug abusers. We all know the problem. But if there's no long-term plan to handle existing problems that are already known to us, and to handle hidden drug abusers to be detected in future, if you don't have sufficient institutional care, be it daycare or other services provided by the centers, how are you going to solve the whole problem? Today, if you cannot give me all the details, I bet in 2 years' time, you start to stop arresting the hidden drug abusers so as to ease the pressure on the service system. It's same for the drug test in schools. Of course, drug tests in schools are actually absurd. More importantly, how are you going to really detect all the drug abusers? Can you help them, even if you're able to detect them? Will you put them to football playing in order to assist them to get rid of drug abuse? Professor Sheck, any response? Just 2 points. Mr. Leung is concerned about service resources. We're also very concerned about that. $3 billion have been injected into the Beat Drug Fund, more than 100 additional social workers, and then 11 counseling centers. I'm not saying that these are sufficient. There are not enough services. We'll continue to increase services, and we've been talking to the government about this. The drug test in schools was very successful. Counselors can visit our website. We conducted 2 polls. The drug abuse rate of schools with the drug test were lower than those schools without the test. Mr. Michael Tan, the document mentions that between 2008 to 2012, the number of drug abusers below the age of 21 has dropped, a drop of 40%. For those taking drugs for the first time, for the past few years, the administration had put in a great deal of effort in terms of publicity. The publicity materials were actually appalling. As for the history of drug abuse, it's lengthening. I'd like to know how your publicity efforts have targeted these people. Obviously, the publicity effort was not deterrent enough. So have you looked into why the deterrent effect was not strong enough? Were they suffering from depression, solitude, peer pressure, or whatnot? Did you examine how your publicity activities could approach these people, apart from arresting them? Professor Sheck, I'd like to thank Mr. Tan for his remarks. His observations were correct. the effect of publicity materials like APIs are only 80% successful. For the remaining 20% abusers, publicity had no effect on them. You mentioned depression, solitude, peer pressure, etc. Yes, those matter. These people go to high-risk venues like parks. So with this DRT, we would like to identify them as early as possible. We don't want to wait till the history of abuse to reach, say, 4 or even 6 years, when they've already suffered very serious bodily harm.
What about publicity? Apparently, you have not done anything to target this group of people. No, that's not true. We have this hotline, 186186, is round the clock. And for the hidden youth, they would also call up this hotline. And at the Prince of Wales Hospital, they also have this urology specialist clinic to deal with that. Yes, Commissioner? Thank you. On the question asked by Mr. Tian on publicity, we have actually put in many resources in different channels so that we can reach out to different communities and groups. Generally speaking, of course, through TV APIs and radio APIs, we'll be able to reach out to the largest group. But then on public transport, karaoke, and even cinemas, advertisements and commercials would also be effective. Other than that, we try to make use of different avenues to penetrate or to impart the message as extensively as is possible. In fact, many of them would be rather passive. Other than publicity, many of them also stay in the community. We have also heard the feedback from many NGOs. All right, they would also try to assert peer influence. So if we are able to cooperate with the NGOs at the district level, then we'll be able to increase awareness. And then for parents and also community leaders, if they can identify some abnormal behavior in an early stage, then other than the drug abusers themselves, we hope that people around them would also have the awareness so that they can seek help early. So it's a multi-pronged approach. All right, 2 more members would like to ask in the second round. We also have another item on the agenda. That's why we will have to extend the meeting by another 15 minutes. We have to grasp the time better. All right, Kwok Wai Keung and Yu Si Wing would like to ask in the second round. Mr. Chen Kin Po too. All right, 1 minute for your question and then 2 minutes for the administration or the ACAN to respond. Kwok Wai Keung. Thank you, Chairman. The harm of drugs is something that we all know. Some members might not have a good grasp of them, and they are saying that, all right, drug driving is a serious matter, but then for drug abuse is not a very serious matter. But then for law and order problems arising from drug taking and the harms that could be done by drugs would be very tremendous. All right, we're talking about the 10,000 cases that have been identified. So what about those who have not been identified then? And also, according to many residents, they have told me that assuming that my son is taking drugs, or if I know that the boy next door is taking drugs, what if I act as a whistleblower? What happens? According to this paper, Yu Si Wing. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, please continue. Well, just now we talked about human rights and also how we can strike a balance between the RDT and human rights. All right, human rights are important, but then it's a broad subject. I think the critical issue here is the recipients, and they are the parents of these drug abusers. I hope that at the next stage you listen more to the parents' views because they are facing this problem. How are they supposed to deal with their kids? And next is about the role played by the police. If we're going to have this scheme, it's a mandatory scheme. I hope that this can be implemented. Well, I'm not suggesting that the police needs to set up a team so that the police officer responsible for a particular case will be the case officer too. I think the police can also set up a dedicated team to follow up on these cases. I think the police would be better placed than the social workers because they are not afraid of the social workers, but rather they would be afraid of the police. Mr. Chen Kin-po, well, many people are concerned about possible police abuse of power. But then what's the problem? Well, the best that they can do is to get somebody to have a urine test. And if it's not, there is no suspicion at all, why would they be bothered to take somebody or to get somebody to take a urine test? So how would they be abusing their power? So why this concern or worry? Is that unwarranted? Can you explain? Professor Sheck, I'll answer the first question first. If you look at international literature, usually if you identify one, you're actually talking about 3 to 4 that have not been identified. So it's a hidden problem. So for those who have become invisible, actually you're talking about 30, 40,000. And if half of them are young people, then we are talking about 15 to 20,000. So the figure is not small at all. That's why we are worried. And in the past, I've often put forth this argument. If you look at Hong Kong's state of economic development, our drug problem has been well under control. We have been doing a good job. Do we want to be like London or New York? And in Hong Kong, we have a safe house for drugs so that they can go in and take drugs. And of course, there would also be counseling service. But then this is not my personal choice. It's also not something that the administration would decide. Is the community's choice. Is like what Yu Si-wing said. Well, I've asked many parents, and if I ask 10 parents, then all 10 would be in favor of this scheme, and they would say that drug problem is a major issue, is a black or white issue. So we will try to collect more parents' views. And somebody also raised this, that is in the end, it's all about a urine test. But then, well, we have to be very careful about urine tests. And for trained police officers doing this, they also would be aware that if everything has to be recorded by CCTV, then there is a very slim chance that they could abuse their power because they will be caught red-handed. And if they want to frame you up, there are many ways that they can frame you up. It would be easier than asking you to give a urine sample for test. So that's my personal view. And finally, today when I came over to Admiralty, well, somebody approached me and said that you look a lot taller than you appear on TV, and please work harder because you've been doing a remarkable job. And I'm very pleased that somebody whom I did not know actually encouraged me. All right, we have had a very detailed discussion, and in the process, we also need to deal with some issue raised by members. Can we have a public consultation? In fact, starting from the 25th of September 2013, the ACAN started this 4-month consultation, and in different districts, they have held 4 public forums, and over 300 deputations and individuals attended those forums. And ACAN, according to what I've been told, you've talked to the legal profession, the medical association, the medical profession, and also rehabilitation groups, and so on. You've reached out to those groups. Yes, we would take the initiative to contact them. And as far as I'm aware, within this council, the Welfare Services Panel would also be holding a public hearing on the 19th of November. So, Ms. Emily Lau talked about the involvement of this council. Yes, at the Welfare Services Panel, you can also express your views. Another thing is, well, just now, we also referred to some professional groups. Well, I think we should consider at our January meeting, we can invite some of these professional groups to express their views to us. I think, well, if we adopt that approach, on top of what's being done by the Welfare Services Panel, I think that might be a good idea. So I'll give it further thought. Sorry, I think we should be discussing that here. So why are they going to discuss this at the Welfare Services panel? All right, they are also talking about drug rehabilitation and service for the community. I don't think that's a good idea because the scope of the discussion would also be very broad. All right, are we going to use our time that way? After our discussion today, they're going to discuss it again at their meeting. Sorry, we have another item to go before the end of this meeting. Mr. Kwok, I think January would be a bit too early. I think we need to give them a bit more time to collect the information. All right, so that's all for this item today. We have to invite another team of officials to join us. It's about recent enhancement initiatives in penal institutions, and joining us today. Please discuss that after you have left the room. We have Ms. Bella Mui, Acting Deputy Secretary for Security, and Mr. Lam Kwok Leung, Acting Deputy Commissioner of Correctional Services. Paper from the administration is in paper number CB-2 184-05. Sorry, because of the time constraint, you only have 20 minutes to go before the end of the meeting. So please be as brief and concise as possible. I'm sure members have all read the paper you provided, and please be brief in your presentation, and then we'll leave some time for members to ask questions. Yes, Deputy Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. The Security Bureau and the CSD would like to submit this paper to members on the recent enhancement initiatives in penal institutions. Number one, we have the Waste No Food scheme, and that is to echo the administration's initiative on Foodwise Hong Kong campaign. And in Lo Wu, we launched this Waste No Food scheme, and the purpose is to encourage the inmates to take part in this scheme on a voluntary basis, and in general, the quantity of food would be reduced by 1/6 on average, and then for the other food items there would not be any reduction, and the response has been quite good. Well, it improved from 40% to 80%, and then in terms of the decrease in food wastage, that also came down by 40%, and also we have also adopted or installed a food waste decomposing system to convert food waste into useful organic fertilizers. With a successful experience, we are going to introduce this to Mahang Penal Institution with more elderly inmates, and we would also be introducing this decomposing system. Well, sorry, Deputy Secretary, looking at the time that we have to end our meeting by 4:45. So with your agreement, can we extend it further so that we can wrap up by 5? So we have to have your agreement. It's not within my power to extend the meeting by another 15 minutes. So agreed? All right. We also have this smoke-free institution. Yes, inmates are free to smoke, but then to consider, we'd like to encourage them to quit smoking. That's why we try to introduce this smoke-free penal institution. And in 2012, we tested this out in Tong Tau Penal Institution, and we encourage all the inmates in these institutions to quit smoking. And at the same time, we would also try to take in inmates who would be prepared to quit smoking. And by the end of 2012, in Tong Tau, some 700 plus inmates have already quit smoking or have decided to quit smoking. And on the 1st of January this year, the CSD formally set up the Tong Tau institution as the first smoke-free prison zone, and some 300 plus inmates in the TTCI are either in the process of quitting smoking or have already quit smoking, and this will be progressively extended to other institutions so that for persons in custody who are non-smokers or who are determined to quit smoking, they can also go into those areas. Another initiative is to introduce X-ray body scanner in order to ensure good order of penal institutions and to maintain a drug-free environment for the persons in custody. The CSD has taken efforts to conduct this test on the inmates and to further put the concept of caring for the people into practice. We have introduced this X-ray body scanner in Lai Chi Kok Reception Center to search newly admitted male persons in custody in order to replace the conventional way of doing the checking manually. Ever since the introduction of the scanner up to September this year, there were 21 cases of internal concealment of drugs by persons in custody. The department has started to procure another 3 scanners. It is anticipated that in 2014-15, the scanners can be installed in Pick Up Correctional Institution, Lowu CI, and TLCI. Mr. Chen Chi-chun, Ms. Emily Lau, Mr. U.C. Wing would like to speak. Any more? Mr. James Yan. And then Mr. Kwok Wai Kang. All right, 4 minutes each. Well, I'd like to draw a line there, but I'm not sure whether I can do so. Mr. Chen Chi-chun, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask about the X-ray body scanner. I support the introduction of the scanner to replace the traditional approach. Although the traditional approach is to stop the influx of drugs into correctional institutions, but in fact, prisoners will feel being insulted. The department won't agree, but of course, we're now going to have a new approach, which is an improvement. I'd like to know when the new X-ray body scanners can be installed in all institutions. Now, another 3 scanners will be procured. Why can't you expedite the program? Why can't you adopt the scanner on a comprehensive manner? I was told that the scanner in Lai Chi Kok had broken down. Is that true? If that's true, for how many days has the scanner broken down? If a prisoner rejects the traditional search, can he request to go to another institution like Lai Chi Kok to be checked by this X-ray scanner? Mr. Lam? First of all, whether or not X-ray body scanners will totally replace the traditional approach. First of all, when we admit inmates, they'll first of all be held in custody centers to learn of certain information and knowledge and go through certain steps before transferring to prisons. That's why we need security checks and check the rectum, etc., etc. When we procure these scanners and install them in all institutions, transfers won't be necessary in future. So Lai Chi Kok Center will get the scanner and then progressively will install scanners in every institution. If an inmate rejects the check, that is, if he doesn't want X-ray scanning, we'll use the traditional search. Whether or not that person will be referred to Lai Chi Kok, say, for the check, as I explained, in future we won't need this step, because at the first stop of the reception process, that action will
have already been taken. What about breaking down of scanners? We introduced the scanners in October last year. Tests were carried out. In my impression, there was one case of breaking down, and we asked the supplier to do repair. For any equipment, repair and maintenance are needed. In future, in the procurement process, we'll see how the scanners perform. Well, we spent a long time to carry out tests before procurement to make sure that it suits us. It's easier to detect superficial metal, but for internal detection, it's more difficult. We'll continue to monitor the situation for some time. Ms. Emily Lam and then Mr. Yu Si Wing. As the Deputy Commissioner is here, will visit one of your penal institutions, so please make sure that we have a look at the scanner. Well, in fact, these should have been adopted a long time ago. We mentioned all these in LegCo. Now we're told that if an inmate disagrees, that is in paragraph 16, that is if they reject the scanner, you use the traditional approach. Well, how do you know that as they know you use the scanner, they won't traffic drugs? And then in paragraph 18, we know that 3 additional scanners will be procured. Why not more? My opinion is that when necessary, you should procure these scanners. I'd like to know whether the police has got these scanners as well. We don't want any more manual checks. Deputy Commissioner, on the 25th of November, members will visit our institution. Yes, we'll introduce the scanner to you on that day. Now, whether any person has rejected the manual rectal search, yes. Ever since the introduction of the X-ray scanner, we had 13 cases of refusal. Why is it that these scanners can help curb drug trafficking? Now, for the first 9 months, we got 21 cases in which we detected drugs in the internal organs by way of the scanners. Of course, we've now mastered the technique. It's not easy for detection. And in September last year, we had 47. That means after using the scanner, the figure has dropped remarkably. Now, the scanner is to replace the manual rectal search. As a result of using the scanner, drug traffickers know that it's easier for us to detect drugs now, so the drugs detected have decreased. Why just 3 then? As I said, we first have the inmates in our custody centers, and if any inmate has to be transferred to correctional institutions, we don't need to carry out another manual rectal research. Mr. Yu Si Wing, what about the police? Have they got any scanner? I'll go back and check the information with the police and submit the supplementary information to the panel. Yes, pass the information to the Secretariat. Mr. Yu Si Wing, I'd like to ask about the Waste No Food scheme. Yes, the publicity material said that the scheme has been very effective. But what about sustainability and continuity? People may say, oh, it's like this. Those who have a high awareness of environmental protection will act accordingly, otherwise not. Will you offer incentives such that participants of the scheme receive some form of encouragement. Have you ever thought of incentives? Yes, would you please think about incentives so as to attract more participants? My second question is related to the X-ray body scanner. I very much support it. Manual search is a huge insult to human dignity. But I find it strange that you allow those who refuse to be scanned to go back to the manual search. If you are equipped with a scanner, you should actually abolish manual search. I think you should no longer allow inmates to choose that option. Deputy Commissioner, thank you. For the Waste No Food scheme, we now adopt an incentive approach. The feedback or reaction has been good. We'll think of other measures as well. For the male institutions, we'll examine in future how the scheme can be extended to them. Yes, we would like all our institutions to contribute to environmental protection. As for the scanner, statutorily, we're empowered to search the internal cavities of a person to curb drugs from flowing into our penal institutions. That's the traditional approach. After so many years, after studies and after seeking legal advice, we implemented the existing measure, that is to use the scanner. Some inmates refuse to use the scanner. Well, there are various reasons. Maybe an inmate feels that he's not feeling very well. He doesn't want to be X-rayed. Then upon receiving a refusal, we'll go back to manual rectal search. Yes, even for our colleagues, it's not a desirable job to carry out a manual search, manual rectal search. In the process of information collection, we found that the scanner, it was difficult for us to detect metal in the internal parts of a person. But then we discovered that this scanner will be able to detect metals, so we procured it. Mr. Yu Si-wing, after review, the administration can amend the law to abolish manual rectal search if the administration is of the view that that's a desirable approach. Will you consider abolishing manual search? Well, first of all, we have zero tolerance for drugs in our penal institutions. Cases did reveal that drugs were placed in the rectum or other internal cavities of a person. Now, the X-ray scanner can replace a manual search. Now, if the inmate refuses to be checked by the scanner, and if we abolish the manual rectal search, we won't be able to search the bodies of the inmates for drugs. Mr. Michael Tan, I talked to ex-prisoners. I asked whether, in a hidden manner, they didn't eat the food given to them. Well, they told me that sometimes, say, red bean soup served to them was salty in taste rather than sweet. I wonder what the reason was. And then before the release of an inmate, what sort of training programs will be offered to him to help with his rehabilitation. Understand that ex-offenders find it difficult to find jobs in society. Well, many of them are involved in the production of road signs, but all road signs are produced by the government. But we don't always have road signs, so these ex-offenders only have one employment. And then people asked me why they are not taught to manufacture light boxes. Well, I think, Mr. Tian, you are digressing. I think these enhancement initiatives are to help the inmates in the penal institutions. You have to consider what will happen to them after they have left the institution. Well, Mr. Tian, if you're interested, we can discuss this on another occasion.
Yes, Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Tian. I'll be very brief in my response. All right, whether or not red bean soup should be sweet or salty, all right, our dietitian will come up with the recipe and the menu, and then we'll prepare the meal accordingly, whether or not the taste is good and whether or not they will join this scheme as a result of that. Well, for JCs visiting the penal institutions, we welcome them to try the food being provided to the inmates. I don't think what you said was true. And also on training, I understand that within the penal institutions, in arranging for jobs and training, there are several objectives. Number one, they will have to have this good habit, and also they would also have to acquire life skills so that they would be able to find jobs more easily. Number one, we have to consider the needs in the market, whether or not there would be appropriate training courses available for them. And also for adult inmates, they would not be required to undergo vocational training unless it's absolutely voluntary. But then for young penal inmates, they'll be required to undergo such training, and there are more than 30 such vocational training courses available. Recently, we have also offered welding and also certain craftsmanship training, which is not readily available in the market. And after they have been discharged, some voluntary agencies and NGOs might also follow up on the cases. And of course, that's done on a voluntary basis. And within 6 months, over 75% of the ex-inmates were able to find jobs, and the success rate is high. And of course, the market is changing rapidly. We will have to monitor it closely to see if appropriate courses can be offered. I'd like to call upon members to join us in our visit on the 25th of November to Stanley to have a better understanding of the operation of the CSD. All right. On this particular item today, I think we can wrap up our discussion here. Yes, members are concerned about the body scanner and how we can enhance our efficiency of operation. All right. So much for this item. Next item, AOB, none. Just a reminder, our date of next meeting, December the 3rd. Without further ado, I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.